Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight marks round one of the competition, featuring the incredibly talented narrator, Raggedy Anzy. We have some seriously creepy cryptid stories for you tonight, so buckle in, because it's time to let the darkness take control.
I remember when I was about 18 or 19 years old, maybe even 20. I had just recently bought my cherry red Mustang 5.0 coupe, and I was the baddest street racer in town. So after a couple of passes at the track with some of my racing buddies, I decided it was time to go home. The drive from Assunpink to Trenton wasn't a long one, but was long enough that at 3 in the morning on a cool, late summer night, the silence and loneliness of the drive made the night seem a lot more eerie. Regardless of this fact, I was a force to be reckoned with. Me and my red Mustang weren't going to drive slow this night. Despite the strange feeling this night gave me, I took off into the night, homebound for a nice warm bed and some well-deserved sleep. About 10 minutes into the night ride, a fog began to roll in. This is normal in this area because there are plenty of rivers and ponds in the area, and late summer, early fall, it tends to get a bit foggy. So I'm cruising around, minding my own business. The cars are doing about 80 miles per hour when I suddenly see 2 eyes a good distance up the road. I'm aware of the presence of deer all over this area, so I decide to wisely slow down and turn my high beams on. Whatever it wasn't moving. That was for sure. So I continued now at about 40 miles per hour. This was a back road, so changing lanes wasn't really an option. Didn't matter to me, though. I figured that I would just slowly drive up to the deer or make my way around it, and that would just be that. Here's where it got stranger. The fog thickened up a bit, and I began to lose visibility. I lowered my headlights down so I could see the road better through the fog. Before I knew it, the eyes were about 30 feet in front of me, and I was almost at a stop, barely doing 10 miles an hour. It still hadn't dawned on me the strangeness of this event, and how fixed those eyes were on me. I began to feel uneasy. And since I was young and restless, I figured I'd scare the deer off the road. So I stomped on the accelerator and maneuvered to burn past the deer, only as I took off, the thing came running at me. Only it wasn't a deer. Strangely enough, I don't know what it was. It ran at my car, and I slammed on the brakes. It jumped towards my car, and I heard it run across the roof of the vehicle, and I felt it lead off the trunk. I sat confused for a moment. I knew in that moment, what I had seen was not a deer. It was too big, and whatever it was ran on 2 legs, not 4. I peered out my rearview mirror and saw nothing. I immediately was shaken by this. Was it still there? Was it hiding, waiting for me to exit the car to investigate? Whatever it was, it just vanished. One moment I felt it leaping off the back of my car, and the next second I saw nothing in the rearview mirror. I wasted no time after that. I hightailed it out of there and raced home. When I got home, I felt safer. It was late, but Trenton is a city filled with people. A place where your closest neighbor's house is literally attached to yours. So I exited my Mustang to see if I could spot any damage or markings or something. And what I saw will stick with me for as long as I live. The hood and roof were covered in footprints that were almost human-like. The footprints went from the hood to the trunk as if something had ran across it. There were minor scratches as well. The footprints weren't average at all. It was like whatever ran across the hood of the car was only part human. The footprints were way too big to be a person, and the prints were only the balls of the foot and toes, not the heel. I never stopped taking that road home, as it was the fastest, and this wasn't the last thing weird that happened on that road either. It's just the first strange event that comes to mind when I think about all the weird things I've experienced.
I live in the country, and usually love it. I'm a big Pokemon fan, and have been for a long time. Last summer, I was playing a lot of Pokemon Go. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a mobile game that requires you to walk in the real world to catch Pokemon. Post offices and town offices are usually places where you can get new items. Well, I had been busy one day and didn't get a chance to go out and play. It was dark before I had a chance. I decided to go ahead and go for a little walk. It is about a mile round trip to the post office, and I've done it before and felt pretty safe about doing it again, as it's a very safe neighborhood. I grabbed my phone and headed out. It's a heavily wooded area with a few houses and fields. I had just passed the neighbor's house when I heard it. There was a shuffling in the woods near me. I quickly got to the other side of the street. Deer are pretty common here, and I didn't want one to jump out and run into me. I expected a deer to run out and cross the road, but none came, and the noise got louder. I raised my phone up to see if I could use the light to see what it was. The light, however, was far too weak to illuminate everything, and I started walking quicker, and I thought it would just go away. I reached my neighbor's house that has rather overgrown fields, and could see the top of the grass move as whatever it was moved through it, but I still couldn't see it. Whatever it was stopped making noise. I reached the post office and checked into my game. Playing helped me relax, and I forgot about what had scared me. Then I turned and headed home. As I passed my neighbor's house within the long grass, I heard the movement again. It had waited for me. Mind you, I was at the post office for about 20 minutes because there was a lot to do on my game, and as I walked along, I kept my eyes on my feet and did not dare look into the woods. It was clear that whatever was there wasn't going to hurt me. It would have done so already, and I didn't want to risk seeing it. I was terrified, and I could hear it crashing about the woods. I thought about calling my husband to come get me, but part of me was scared to make a noise. What if my silence was the only thing that had kept this thing from attacking me? Finally, I reached a neighbor's house that had a big open yard. Whatever was following me stopped making noise, and it seemed like it was going away. I quickly rushed the short distance home and was shaking. I don't know what it was that followed me, and part of me doesn't ever want to know. My husband thinks it's just a curious bear or a coyote. That doesn't really make me feel any better.
So my father has spent most of his life in the forest. According to my grandmother, it was kind of normal that my father went missing for 2 to 3 days in their local forest at the age of 6. He spent these days walking around, enjoying the nature. After my grandma realized they can't really stop him, it has become a regular thing. This love of nature has stayed with my father for his whole life. He still goes out hunting and camping regularly. I'm telling this to give y'all some context. He has spent his whole life in the nature. He knows every sound and recognizes every animal at a glance. He told me this story for the first time 10 years ago. As a skeptic, I didn't pay much attention to it, as I believed it to be a story he came up with to entertain and scare us. I started to take it seriously because time to time he retold this and every detail stayed the same, and he was visibly nervous during his tale. He's not easily scared or something, so I feel I can trust him with this, and I can believe his story. So one time he spent the night in the forest with his dog, a dachshund trained for hunting. He was walking down a road separating 2 parts of the forest. He then realized that his dog, who walked in front of him, has stopped walking and ran back to my father and sat down behind his legs. Then my father saw that someone is coming from the forest. He believed it was someone on the back of a horse because he only saw the reflections of an eye and they were too high up to be a walking person's. Then he realized the eyes are way bigger than normal humans. He said they were the size of tennis balls, and they were also really far apart from each other. He noticed that the creature was looking around because the reflections disappeared and reappeared as if it was turning its head. When the creature saw my father, or at least acknowledged his presence, he fixed his eyes on him and came out from the trees. According to my dad, it was levitating. It was at least 50 centimeters off the ground. It made no sound and was skinny but was wearing some type of robe or clothing. So there was nothing else to see besides his eyes, which colors or appeared to be a mix of red, brown, and gray. He compared it to a Dementor from Harry Potter. The creature didn't confront my father or anything. It simply levitated through the path and disappeared in the woods on the other side of the road. This is weirder than it seems, since that side of the forest is just a narrow 3 to 4 meter wide region of trees. There is no concrete fence to separate the forest from a factory. After this encounter, my father turned back because he didn't want to risk a second meeting. He spent the rest of the night in a different area. In the morning, he went back to check for trails, but the creature did not leave any sign of his presence. No footprints, nothing at all.
For a few weeks now, my husband and I have been hearing these bizarre animalistic noises from our window. 2 nights ago, I decided to film and investigate. I had the creepiest feeling, like I could feel eyes on me the entire time. My heart was racing, and my flashlight kept dimming down and brightening back up. All of that was enough to send me back inside. It wasn't until after I reviewed the footage that I saw it. I don't know for sure what it was, but I know it wasn't a bear or coyote, as they aren't even found where I live. All I know is that it was not alone in my yard, and that was scary as hell. Also, our other neighbor next door, as their house is not seen on video, just moved in and have called the police 3 times in as many weeks for damage done to their yard, including a large bush being ripped up. For us, mainly we've been having our yard ornaments strewn about, including a cement turtle that weighs nearly 60 pounds. This all started around the time we began to hear noises. The neighboring White House, seen in the video, actually had a break-in recently, but I'm not 100% sure which of these events are connected to the video, if any. You'll be able to find the video in the description.
My fiancée Alana and I have always been into the occult and paranormal. We're the kind of people who used to fantasize about getting to see a cryptid or exploring a famous haunted location just for the thrill. I have to be careful about being around too much of the dark energy that some haunted locations have, though, since I'm an empath. For anyone not familiar with the term, an empath is defined as a person with the paranormal ability to apprehend the mental or emotional state of another individual. Since childhood, I've learned to manifest my ability, and now I can absorb emotions from the physical and metaphysical realms. It's a blessing and a curse. Last Tuesday, Alana and I were in the car on our way home from work when our favorite DJ came on the radio. Good morning, this is Mitchell McCarthy on WSK 99.4, and we have a treat for the first person who can call and name this song for the following snippet. This is your last chance to win one of our road trip revelry packages. After a brief pause, the music started playing. We listened intently. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful... As it stopped, the radio host came back on. Now let's see which lucky caller will win this road trip-tastic reward. Alana's mom is a huge fan of older music, so we already knew who it was and what the song was. My fiancé immediately dialed the number, not expecting to be the right caller, but she was. I grinned as she correctly blurted out the right answer, silently high-fiving herself. Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World. The radio host paused dramatically, then he made a drumroll sound with his hands. Ladies and gents, we have a winner! You know what that means, miss? You and 2 friends have won an all-inclusive road trip to wonderful New Orleans, and you guys will be getting to Louisiana just in time to get some beads! My fiancé got off the phone, grinning from ear to ear. Let's go pick up the tickets, though I know neither one of us is really interested in Mardi Gras. I nodded, thinking about who else we should have tag along with us. Oh, we should bring Co. He's right along the way, and who said we have to go to Mardi Gras? I'd rather go to Manchac Swamp, the home of Rougarou. I think the locals call it the Cajun Werewolf. After getting the hotel tickets and the food and gas vouchers, we packed our bags. I've made sure to bring a bunch of extra socks since I've always hated having wet socks on. And then we called up the office and put in our time off. 2 weeks later, we set off on the road trip from northeast Pennsylvania to the bayou country of Louisiana. And I couldn't remember being more excited for a vacation. The whole ride south, Alana and I discussed our plans for the trip. Neither of us had ever been to Louisiana, or thought we ever would, so we had never looked up what things were in the area to do. Upon searching Google rigorously, we finally made a plan for our week in Louisiana, and it couldn't have been more perfect unless we went in October rather than July. Monday we would just relax in the hotel, but we weren't staying in just any hotel. The one the radio prize included was a stay at the Dauphine Orleans Hotel, which was located in the French Quarter. The hotel is rumored to be one of the most haunted hotels in Louisiana, and it complemented the theme of our trip perfectly. Tuesday, we would explore the French Quarter to see if we could spot the infamous vampire twins of Louisiana. On Wednesday, we would explore the outskirts of the city and try to find the old houses that had been abandoned, as well as visiting some of the famous voodoo shops. Thursday, we would explore the supposedly haunted St. Vincent's Asylum, which was also located in the French Quarter. And then, for the weekend, we would go to the Manchac Swamp and camp. We would search for the Rougarou and for the voodoo princess Julie White's cabin that was said to be hidden deep in the Manchac Swamp. As the hours passed, Alana and I would switch off driving through each state, stopping for leg breaks. Finally, 14 hours into the trip, we reached our pit stop for the night. We parked in my best friend, Keandre, who we called Co, his driveway in Birmingham, Alabama. And it felt great to be out of the car. It was actually our first time meeting him in person, so it was an emotional moment for all of us. He was overjoyed to see his big bro and big sis. And since he was a fairly large man, he squeezed us into his pillow-like frame with gusto. After telling him about our plan for the week, he was eager to pack some camping gear and to read up about local lore. His tone was zealous, and he quickly gathered what he needed. I want to see the giant wolf man of Manchac Swamp. That was the last thing he said before we all went to sleep. And after 14 hours of straight driving, my fiancé and I were so exhausted that even the hardwood floor of Co's bedroom felt like a memory foam mattress. The next morning, we got up around 8:30 and set off on the last 4 hours of drive. We were so excited to finally be in the voodoo capital of the U.S., and right around mid-afternoon, we reached New Orleans. The minute I stepped into the hotel, the energy hit me like a freight train. It made me physically sick for an hour, and after checking into the room, number 113, we decided to relax and take a nap. We wanted to spend the night with our EVP and heat cameras, trying to find any spirits that were here, and to see if they were as bad as they seemed. None of us could sleep well, though. I'm not sure if it was because of our excitement, or if something more paranormal was keeping us awake. We ate dinner out and checked out some local attractions. And when the clock hit midnight and we got our equipment unpacked, the EVP meter immediately started going off. worse than any other place I had been to. Alana and Co. nearly shit their pants at the sight of how much energy was in our room, and it definitely explained the feeling I had when I first walked into the building. After 20 minutes of setting up cameras and unpacking equipment, we were ready to explore. As we walked through the empty halls of the hotel, we whispered about how odd it was that such a packed hotel would be so silent in the dead of night. Nearly 45 minutes had passed and nothing was caught on our heat camera, and the EVP device wasn't going off as much as it was initially. So we decided to call it a night since we would have more time to explore in the upcoming days. The next few days passed, and we were all growing restless over the fact that we hadn't seen anything even remotely paranormal yet. The places we picked should have had at least some kind of interesting vibes, but there wasn't anything. Over dinner on Wednesday night, Alana made a proposal that Co and I readily agreed to. "Babe, can we just cancel St. Vincent's tour and go to the swamp tomorrow? It seems like all of the drunk, living partiers scared anything paranormal off." After she was done talking, I nodded enthusiastically, and Co breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God someone else had the same thought. We set off back to the hotel to check out and gather our stuff. After about an hour of packing, we fit everything back into our car, heading straight to a trailhead near the swamp. Based off all the legends, this was the part of the swamp that we would be most likely to see the Rougarou in, or find an alleged still-standing witch's cabin. Since I was the only one who was an avid hunter, I was the only one with a gun, and I made sure to pack my .45 caliber pistol with 2 full clips of ammo in case of an emergency. It's common knowledge that large snakes and alligators live in the swamps of Louisiana, so we had figured that we would rather have some means of defense than nothing. After walking for what seemed like hours, we finally decided to take a rest. We had just trekked through one of the roughest parts of the swamp trail, so I immediately changed my socks. I figured that we could use the grime-covered ones as fire fuel later in the night if we couldn't find a tinder, and I had plenty with me, so I wasn't worried. Thankfully, it was a warm night in the swamp, though, so I didn't need to start a fire at all. The fireflies surrounded us that night. It was as if they were millions of stars. It was literally the most beautiful thing any of us had ever seen. It was so relaxing that we were all dozing off in our camping chairs. That is, until we heard an eardrum-bursting howl that sounded like it was right behind us. I took out my pistol and fired a warning shot, and a moment later the grass behind us parted to reveal a scraggly-looking man with long, dark hair. "Please don't shoot me. I wandered into here on accident, and I don't even know where here is. I heard you guys talking and thought you might know a way out." My fiancé, being the caring person she is, paid no mind to the fact that his clothing was torn up and he looked a little unhinged. She invited him to sit with us and even got him a granola bar. After about 10 uncomfortable minutes, I finally spoke up. "So, why are your clothes torn up?" He gave a vague response about how the swamp can beat you up, but he didn't go into detail. I once again tried to get some information out of our strange visitor, though his heavy Cajun accent was a little hard to understand. "Did you see the thing that made that horrendous howl?" He shifted a little, and I could tell he wasn't feeling very comfortable with my questions. He finally replied after thinking about his response carefully. "Boy, you can call me Jack. Now that we're all friends here, there's no need to worry. I can assure you I'm not one of those beasts. In fact, that howl is what scared me into coming here. I don't know how I got here, though I'm assuming I was drunk after the last week of Mardi Gras." I looked at Co as if to give him I don't trust him completely look. Co immediately returned the look, but we continued to chat amicably. We gave Jack an extra sleeping bag and told him that he was welcome to sleep in one of the chairs. We said we would show him the way out in the morning since it's too dangerous to travel in the swamp at night, which he readily agreed to. The next morning, we all arose to find Jack was missing. I looked at Alana and shook my head. Still trust him? You and I both know he had very odd energy. She sighed and just looked down, knowing I was right. We packed our gear, hiking further into the swamp. The next few hours went fast, and the heat was blistering. We all just wanted to relax in the water, but even we knew it wasn't wise to swim in the bayou water. A few hours later, we finally saw a broken-down shack in the middle of the swamp, and we got excited. What if this was the cabin of the voodoo princess? The shack had been left untouched for a long time since there was moss growing on everything. We made our way inside the building, and we were immediately weirded out. Laying in the floor was a little hand-sewn doll, and it looked exactly like Jack. We decided to set up camp for the night, but made sure we got well away from the shack. That night was a bit chillier, so we made a fire. We were telling scary stories around when we again heard a loud howl. No sooner had I put my gun in my hands when Jack came walking out of the swamp. "Friends, we meet again. I'm sorry I left so unexpectedly this morning. A big old snake chased me off, and then I got lost until I saw the fire. Mind if I stay with you again tonight?" We hesitated, but we didn't want him to get hurt out there, so we agreed. He smiled and thanked us again. And the hours passed quickly as we ate and chatted until we got sleepy. The next morning, the same thing happened. Jack had vanished again, leaving us all extremely concerned. I had decided that if we saw him again tonight, I would stay awake until morning to see where he kept going. We hiked back out of the swamp, double timing it to cover more ground than our previous unhurried pace. We had not seen anything out of the normal, other than that doll and Jack. But we still had fun. We got back to the first campsite relatively fast, though we were all exhausted by then. After setting up camp, I told Ko and Alana my plan for the night in case Jack came back. And Ko decided he would be staying up with me because he didn't want to risk me getting harmed. Once again, we heard the howl after sunset. And as expected, Jack came walking out of the swamp behind us right after. We all exchanged a look and welcomed him back as though nothing had happened. A few hours later, Alana fell asleep, and so did Ko despite him saying he would stay up. He finally passed out, and I pretended to while still keeping an eye on Jack. I must have dozed off at some point because when I opened my eyes, the fire was out and Jack was heading into a nearby clump of bushes. I got up and followed him, trying to see where he went in the dim moonlight. "Jack, where are you going?" His response was not what I expected. Instead of hearing him shout back, I heard the howl again. But this time it was behind me. As I turned around slowly, I saw it. The Rougarou. It was a large, almost humanoid white wolf with the most blood-red eyes I had ever seen. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was terrified and I blacked out. Upon waking up, I jumped up and looked around, terrified because I was still somewhere in the swamp with that thing. Dawn was just showing, and I stumbled back to camp. I could hear Alana and Ko shouting to me from the distance. I hurried back to them. They looked worried sick, and we were relieved to be back together. We figured I must have had a night terror, which I was known for, and I must have sleepwalked out of camp. We made our way out of the swamp and back to our car, and after packing up quickly, we headed out of Louisiana and back towards Ko's house. On our way home, however, I felt different. I was more hungry than normal, and as I looked into the mirror, my normally hazel eyes did something I'd never seen before. They flashed blood red, just like that monster I had seen last night.
Around 5 p.m. on the west coast of Sweden today, with it being pitch black outside, me and my dad went for a walk in a forest, about 10 minutes from civilization, without any lights, trails without street lights and no flashlights. We saw the trail fairly clearly, and we would often take walks together, as we were talking about fairly mundane stuff. We were right next to a lake, and we noticed a big group of maybe 50 ducks just chilling in the water close to the beach. Out of nowhere, maybe 25 meters in front of us, a creature ran across the trail from right to left and continued down towards the lake. It quickly disappeared out of sight. I'd say it must have been about at least 150 centimeters tall, on all fours, although the front legs looked a lot bigger than the hind legs, like a bipedal creature running on all fours. It was beige or brown, and running really fast. It made no noise except the sound of running, and all the ducks in the lake freaked out and started flying and screaming, which feels like weird behavior if it was just a deer running past, although I'm no wildlife expert. Just after the creature ran past, a very heavy smell of iron and blood permeated the air, and both of us could smell it. I've never experienced a smell like that before, and I work in a hospital and deal with blood often. Personally, I'm fascinated by these kind of events and definitely believe in different possibilities, but my dad's a hardcore skeptic and realist. He grew up on a farm in the middle of Sweden's forests and is very familiar with Swedish wildlife. He said he'd never seen that shape before, or anything go that fast. We don't have many big mammals here at all. The closest possibility is a deer, but they usually never come out that close to people, and I've never seen one move that fast. And all their legs are roughly the same size, of course. Not like this one, that seemed to have a significantly larger upper body. Part of me thinks it could be a goat man. If not, another kind of humanoid. All thoughts are welcome, and I'm still shocked by the events we witnessed.
I had grown up spending a lot of time in the woods near my house, often camping there with my father and my younger brother. Every so often, we would go up to the mountains and spend a week or so there just to get away from it all and forget about the noise back home. Fond memories that are now long gone. Flash forward to the present, I am now in my mid-30s. My father has since died from cancer, and my relationship with my brother soured for, well, other reasons I would prefer to leave undisclosed. I have chosen to remain single because most marriages end in divorce, and let's face it, divorce laws are not kind to men. I have few close friends, but I generally keep to myself. It can be pretty lonely sometimes. Seemingly out of the blue one day, my brother, let's call him Jake, called me and told me he wished to patch things up. I didn't want the feud to continue indefinitely, so I agreed. Long story short, we laid bare our faults and shortcomings to each other and accepted responsibility for mistakes made. It was genuinely a heartwarming reconciliation. It was then that I made a suggestion that, unknown to me at the time, would end up haunting me for the rest of my life. What do you say we go camping, Jake? Just like old times. He happily agreed. Our camping trip started out normal enough. We went fishing and hiking. We sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and catching up over the past 5 years. For the first time in a while, I was feeling truly happy. Then on our third night, things took an ugly turn for the worse. Jake had woken up in the middle of the night to take a leak in the woods. Seems normal enough, doesn't it? Well, you'd be mistaken for thinking so. I woke up to the sound of something opening my tent. It was Jake, and he looked shaken and panicked. His eyes were bulging out of his sockets, and his face was sweating profusely. "Wake up, Michael!" Which is not my real name, just go with it. I checked my cell phone. Jake, it's almost 2 a.m. What is so damned urgent at this hour? I saw, he said with his mouth quivering. It was some creature. My younger brother was a bit of a prankster growing up, and to some degree it never really left him as an adult. Jake, it was probably just a bear or a cougar. We didn't leave any of our food out in the open, so they'll probably just leave us alone. But my brother was insistent. Michael, this was no cougar or bear. It was... I don't know what the fuck it is. It was devouring something. I was still groggy and pretty cranky and definitely not in the mood for games. Jake, go back to your tent. I'm not interested in your tall tales right now. Just then, I heard a very loud guttural noise in the distance. It was difficult to describe, like the sound of a screaming banshee mixed with the deep roar of a tiger or a lion. I guess you could say it sounded similar to the Godzilla roar, except far more frightening. Did you hear that? Jake said with a shaking voice. Yes, I did. I tried my best to downplay it. But like I said, it was probably just a bear. It was not a bear, goddammit! Jake, I think you should consider the possibility that you mistook what you saw. It happens to all of us, especially when we're tired. Jake's frustration grew. Michael, he said through gritted teeth. Enough! You're imagining things now. Go back to sleep. Jake stomped off back to his tent, cursing the whole way. I slowly drifted back to sleep, not really considering whether or not he was telling the truth. At about 8 a.m. in the morning, we both woke up. I felt refreshed, but Jake was looking shaken. Perhaps he didn't get much sleep. Jake, what do you say we take a walk? Are you shitting me, dude? With that thing out there? I sighed in frustration. Then I remembered we both packed our guns with us in the event of a possible attack of a wild animal. Would it make you feel better if we brought our guns with us? He hesitated for a moment, but he agreed eventually. So we both went out for a nice, quiet walk several miles from our campsite. I enjoyed myself, but Jake remained on edge. He kept his shotgun in front of him the whole way, clearly expecting an attack at any moment. After about 2 hours, we returned to the campsite, and what we saw horrified us. Near Jake's tent was the mangled corpse of a fellow camper. His face had been ripped off, and both of his arms were missing. His intestines were spilled out all over the ground. The sight of this caused both of us to vomit. My brother's fears were only exacerbated. That thing! It was that damn monster that did this! Jake, calm yourself. It's not all that unusual for a camper to be killed by a bear. It was not a bear! This is where I put my foot down. Jake, I've had it with your bullshit. Now, we are going to call park services and they'll send someone to pick up the body. Afterwards, we are going fishing again, and I don't want to hear about this creature nonsense ever again. Am I clear? He looked angry but resigned. He sighed in defeat and contacted the park services to inform them of the body. After we hung up, I overheard him say, "Why would it just leave a body at our campsite? Why not devour it?" We went fishing a second time and spent a few hours at the lake shore. Jake seemed calmer this time. Perhaps the serenity of the lake was having an effect, but he seemed to be enjoying himself once more. I wish I could say our camping trip stayed normal the rest of the way. We returned to camp again, and this time what we saw frightened us to our core. It was the body of a fully grown grizzly bear. A male that had to have weighed at least 1,000 pounds. The corpse was covered head to toe in deep gash wounds. The throat and belly were torn wide open. What could have possibly done this? Jake stepped up to the corpse and examined the claw marks. They were very long and smooth. Those claw marks could have only been made by that creature. This time I didn't get mad at my brother for mentioning it. I was now considering the possibility that he wasn't bullshitting me. Why could it only be that? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. From what I saw of it, that creature had ridiculously long claws. Longer than any I've ever seen. Look at how long and fluid these marks are. These were all done in single motions. Make no mistake, this is not the doing of another bear. I tried to take everything in. This was the second time in less than 6 hours that we had found a mangled corpse at our site, and yet not once had the alleged beast come chasing after us when it easily could have. But why would it kill something without eating it and dump the body at our specific site? Jake pondered for a moment. Maybe that thing is sending us a message, a warning. I was not expecting that response. Come on, Jake, what kind of animal possesses that kind of thinking or forethought? Michael, it's warning us to get out of its territory or we'll be next. It sounded strange yet plausible. It would at least explain why we ourselves had not been harmed yet. Jake, what you saw, can you describe it? Well, it was very tall. From my perspective, at least 9 feet. It appears to have the ability to stand upright and walk on all fours. Very hairy, too. Looked kind of like... But Jake's description was interrupted by the sound of some object hitting the ground behind us. We turned around and noticed the severed head of a deer. My heart sank, and I began breathing heavily as I did my brother. I looked up and noticed Jake was staring at the tree line directly in front of him, pointing at something. I turned my head and saw what could only be described as a horrifying abomination. That's it! That's the monster! Jake shouted. The animal, whatever it was indeed 9 feet tall and covered head to toe in black and blue fur. Its head looked like some bastardized combination of a tiger and a wolverine. Its legs were thick as tree trunks, its arms longer than a gorilla, and claws on its hands, which were apparently retractable and were at least 8 to 10 inches in length. Its body was covered in dry blood. It stood there, baring its teeth, and then it roared very loudly. I recognized that noise from last night, that same guttural yell. Jake noticed his shotgun laying on the fold-out chair about 10 feet away, and he began running toward it, but that only caused the creature to run toward him. It was much faster, and it reached Jake before he could reach the gun. The abomination began tearing into him. The screams of my brother were unlike anything I've ever heard. I couldn't help him because that thing was too big and strong. Suddenly, I remembered my own weapon, which I had put in the SUV earlier. I ran towards my vehicle and yanked the shotgun, which still had a round in it, fortunately. I pointed it straight at the monster, pulled the trigger, and the damn thing jammed on me. The creature heard the clicking noise and looked straight up at me. He glared at me. I tried to fire again, but the useless weapon would not cooperate. I felt my pants pocket and found my car keys. I discarded the gun and jumped into the SUV. As I started it up, I looked up and saw the creature running towards me. The moment I got in reverse is the moment the monster landed on my hood and began smashing its head into the windshield. The creature was shockingly strong, as it took only 4 blows to completely smash my windshield. I heard the sound of my tires hitting the asphalt, and I realized I'd reached the main road. I made a violent turn and was able to send the monster flying off my SUV and smashing it into a nearby tree. I turned my vehicle around and floored the gas pedal, wanting to get away as quickly as possible. I checked my rearview mirror and saw to my horror that the creature was gaining on me. I was already up to 50 miles per hour, and this damn thing was running on all fours, making incredible strides. I noticed the creature jump into the air, and seconds later, I heard a loud thump on the roof. The creature peered down at me through the broken windshield and roared angrily, spraying my face with its saliva. It began jabbing its long arms at me, trying to reach me with those long, sharp claws. I did everything I could to dodge, but the creature was too fast. I felt a claw slice on my right shoulder, and I screamed in agony, believing this was the end. And then, suddenly, to my great surprise, silence. I looked in the mirror again and noticed the creature on all fours in the middle of the paved road, pacing back and forth and sniffing the ground in front of him. After about 10 seconds, the beast looked up and snarled one last time before turning around and disappearing into the woods. It took me a moment, but I realized what had happened. I had reached the end of its territory, and it apparently no longer saw any need to continue pursuing me. My brother was right. It really did use those corpses as a warning message. But now my brother is dead, and I feel racked with guilt over not believing him sooner. What in the hell was that thing? Where did it come from? How many other people have fallen victim to its wrath? Did the park rangers know about it? If so, why would they allow anyone to camp anywhere near its territory? Perhaps they didn't know. I don't know the answers to any of these questions. And frankly, I don't want to know either.
The Giant Bird, as told by Miguel Becerril. This story took place near Mexico City, in the mountains of Xochimilco. It all started during my sleep. I began having nightmares. Something evil was watching me. The devil was lingering, bothering me. When morning broke, I had to go for a run. I was very disciplined back then, and used to go running the same mountain where the lizard man had been seen previously. I used to go every day. So I got up that morning, prepared myself, but something was off. I had this strange feeling, telling me that on this particular day, I shouldn't go on my run. Anyway, my sense of responsibility was stronger, and I forced myself to go. I always took one of my dogs with me, but that day the weird feeling was so intense, I decided to take another dog with me. I chose a pit bull and my boxer. They made me feel safer. I've always had a lot of dogs. We headed to the mountains, and as we took the path into the woods, my mind started to flash a lot of images of demons, something that had never happened to me before. I had been a regular to this place for years, and such a thing had never occurred. But that day, it did. I started running with my 2 dogs on the leash, not feeling well at all. I've always believed in God, only back then, I wasn't really convinced. Anyhow, I started praying because I had this horrible feeling, a presence of something, and the demonic images which I'd just seen. So I prayed during the first 3 kilometers, and kept watching my back, because I felt this sharp sensation of being watched. As a matter of fact, I felt it since I woke up, and I kept going, and continued with prayer. But at some point, I heard some kind of call, something like a parrot, only much louder. Then I remembered that flocks of parrots were usual around this time of year, so I got curious and began to look up to see where their nests could possibly be. Some parrots make their nests on the ground, and for a moment I forgot how I had been feeling all the way up, and I tried to ignore them. My dogs were losing it by then, and running straight ahead of me. But as I heard the sound again and again, I got obsessive with it, and started to run so fast I ended up leaving my dogs behind. The sound started to come from everywhere, and it became compulsive. It was winter, so most of the trees were without leaves, and all you could see were the branches. From afar I noticed something move, not very high, because all of them were oak trees, and the feeling had grown stronger. As I keep following the sound through the branches, I saw 2 huge wings open, and a giant bird glide into another tree. But as soon as it reached it, the bird closed its wings and disappeared. I can recall it was of a very similar color to those branches. It was a bird, but one I'd never seen before. I've always liked animals, so I can recognize all the animals from the region. Not this one. I started to follow the bird frantically as it appeared again. Its wingspan was easily more than 2.5 meters, and it was colored in a distinctive yellowish brown. I saw it again, trying to follow it. And every time I kept going, I kept getting deeper into the mountain. So much so that I forgot all about my dogs. I don't know where all that strength came from, because that's a really difficult area to run in. It's incredibly steep. My dogs followed behind, panting with their tongues out, but I kept advancing, thinking that I have to discover what it is, and that I have to see it. See its head, and see its tail. But I never got to. I kept following it as it flew, but every time it stopped at some tree it would disappear. Those are really low trees, only about 3 meters tall or 3.5 at most, and you could see everything very clearly, except this creature. This creature was also very tall, at least 1.5 meters, and each time I got near, it would fly away. Then I heard some dogs barking at the bottom of the cliff, as if they barked at something passing by. They hadn't seen me. This was the point when I just popped out of my trance, just as I reached the cliff. The bird flew away, but I stopped and thought about my dogs, which could be attacked or get into a fight with those dogs down there. So I stopped chasing it, came back to reality, attached their leashes, and started to descend and got calm. I had strayed really far from my usual trail. Nevertheless, I could never see the head of the bird nor its tail. So to this day I cannot say what I saw. It was a very strange experience, and I hope to never see it again.
I'm not a hunter or anything, but my boyfriend is. But these stories are not about hunting. Where my mom's house is, there's a river that runs behind it with nothing but forest surrounding it. Some creepy shit has happened to us and some friends more than once down there at the river. First story. Me and my boyfriend and a couple friends were camping out on the river's sandbar. I had my dog with me. Her name is Anna. We were having a bonfire and setting up the tents before everyone showed up. Then Tim, my boyfriend, Robert, his friend, went into the woods to look for more firewood so I could watch the fire and keep it going until they came back. This left me and Anna by the fire by ourselves. Anna is very protective and I feel safe with her. After they went into the woods, I immediately felt someone or something staring at me from across the river. This river was not very wide, but there was very thick forest on the other side that abruptly stopped right after the river's edge. Anna senses it too and got up from where she was laying at the fire, walked down to the river enough that all 4 of her paws were in the water, all the hairs on her back standing straight up, and she's staring and pointing with one paw at the river's edge across the river. I follow her and stand directly behind her and also stare across the river. I suddenly hear whatever it is move, and so does Anna, and it's not just regular human footsteps I'm hearing. It's trees. It sounded as if it was moving trees and branches out of the way to walk. Anna is following it, moving where it moves, but staying on our side of the river, and she's deeply growling. It's like time was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't see it because the fire was way up on the riverbank and Anna and I were on the river's edge with our feet in the water. Both of us are just staring into the woods across the river. Anna finally stopped moving and is now closer and her legs are in the water now, and she's steadily growling. I'm behind her with my feet up to mid-shin in the water. I finally snap out of it and run back to the fire and call for Tim and Robert. Anna stayed where she was, still growling. They hear me and come back with firewood. Tim says, "What's wrong?" I said, "You didn't hear that?" Robert said, "Hear what?" I said, "There's something across the river and it doesn't sound human. Anna won't stop growling at it." So the 2 guys walk to the river's edge and Robert grabs his pellet gun he brought with him. Tim walks up to Anna and says, "What is it, girl? What do you see?" And she's not breaking her stare, just constantly growling. All of a sudden, Robert and Tim hear it shift, as do I and Anna shifts with it to the left. Well, when it shifts, Robert aims the pellet gun where he heard the shift and fires a pellet into the woods. No sooner than we heard the pellet hit something, we all heard a low, guttural, deep growl for like a second. Once Anna heard the growl, she backed up and got close to Tim and whined a little bit. Then nothing. It's as if it just disappeared. I said screw that and walked my ass back to my mom's house, and we canceled camping for that night. Second story. We are halfway down the trail that leads to the river. Robert and a few other friends. My mom didn't like a lot of people over at the house. We were just hanging out and talking and bullshitting around, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it sounded as if a horse neighed, but more like a laugh. And everyone in our small group heard it. So we noped out of there and got back to my mom's house and are in my mom's yard. We all hear it again, clear as day, a horse neighing laugh at the beginning of the trail. The beginning of the trail is adjacent to my mom's yard. It gave us all chills and we couldn't logically explain it. No one in the neighborhood owns horses, nor has there ever been any in that neighborhood. Third story. Again, we, Tim and our friends, were in the trail of the river. This time we were walking down to the river. It was midsummer and a lot of people were down there. We were looking forward to swimming and having a fun time. We get halfway down the trail and we all see a solid black wolf sitting in the middle of the trail near the end of it, facing us. I remember it clearly. It has yellow eyes and gray around its snout like it was older. This was at 12 or 12:30 p.m. on a bright, sunny day, and people were all in the water. You could hear them laughing and splashing. We all stop in our tracks and stare at it. About 5 people just staring in silence at this black wolf, scared to move or make any noise. It stares at us back. And I shit you not, it fucking grinned at us. Not a typical dog grin where they pant and have their mouth open, no. This was more like a sinister, mischievous grin with sharp teeth and bright yellow eyes. It made my stomach turn. We were about 50 feet from it. And after about 5 minutes, it stopped grinning and simply got up on its hind legs and walked away as if it was a human. We all just looked at each other, asking if we all saw it. Everyone saw the exact same thing. I believe we came across a skinwalker that day. I didn't tell my friends that's what it was, but I knew that's what it was. We said screw swimming that day and left. That was the last time we ever went to that river again. My mom still lives by the river, and I haven't went down there in years and don't plan on it.
On August 11th of 2015, my grandparents and I drove from where they live in Washington State, about 200 miles into the desert, to watch a meteor shower. We found a windmill farm that was nice and dark, by a small field of overgrown grass or weeds. So there we are, and I'm laying in the grass watching the stars, watching some strange objects, not a satellite, not a space station, not a plane, and not a helicopter. I'm well familiar with all of the above, and both the size, light patterns, flight patterns and stuff. This thing was completely unfamiliar. It also split into 6 smaller lights after spiraling around, and then reformed itself a couple of minutes after. When my grandfather's dog, a trained guard dog for his PTSD, supposed to warn him of anything dangerous, starts whimpering, as we hear howling in the distance. My grandparents mutter speculatively about the origin of the howling, saying it was not dogs nor coyotes. Now, because they've both been known to be a little too into the paranormal, I ignored them. So, we were in this field for about 30 minutes, and I am having a lovely time until I see something scuttling across the field towards us. It's hunched and dark, and has the inverted knees of an animal. It's about 5'6", and seems to be pacing around us in the field. The dog at this point starts going mad. But we drove so far to get there, I didn't say anything about the creature. knowing that my grandparents would immediately abandon our field. After a while, the dog started tracking 5 or 6 of these creatures out of the field. As it was losing the ability to keep them all where he could see him, my grandparents noticed and we had to leave. So now I'm very mad and disappointed, because we really only spent half an hour to 40 minutes watching the shower, which was the whole point. So I asked my grandparents if we can pull over further along in the road to keep watching. As I'm looking back for a place for us to turn around and pull into, I see 2 glowing red eyes just behind our taillights, booking it after us. It ran hunched over, but it was the same creature from the field. Needless to say, I didn't insist we pull over. We drove for about 2 hours before the sun came up. At that point we realized we were still about 3 hours away from home, and it was already 5 a.m. But we had only just left the field. You remember we arrived around midnight and spent a maximum of 30 to 40 minutes there? So what the hell happened in those 4 hours? None of us remember.
So one night, after drinking a fair bit at a friend's house, I decided to go home via a shortcut and promptly got myself lost along the way as I went along a forest path. The fact that it was during the fall and it started to drizzle didn't make it any easier to see the solid shapes of pine in all directions. I was disoriented and I was lost in the forest. Then I noticed the shapes of the trees some ways ahead of me move. I couldn't hear a single thing over the rain dripping down from all the trees around. I could just barely make out this shape in the forest, moving in front of me. It was far longer than any animal had the right to be, and I swear it was coming closer to me because the spaces between the trees where I could see a distant clearing were taken up by a solid shape. I lost my shit. I screamed and ran. I fell forward into something. It smelled horrible, and my one hand was squished into the wet warmth of it while my other hand clenched around wet pine needles and cold dirt. I recognized the smell and felt blood on my hand as I withdrew it from the half-solid and half-liquid I'd fallen into. It was all over my clothes. I was quick to my feet but disoriented. I ran, getting whipped by undergrowth, and my clothes snagged by some low branches and old pines, and I could hear them coming after me. The shape that was in the darkness, the shape that had approached me between the trees, it was coming after me, and now I can hear it above the rain as it rushed after me. I could hear how dead branches cracked and the underbrush was pushed aside as it gained on me, and I had no idea what it was. I didn't want to know what it was. I was terrified I'd have the same fate as whatever half-digested thing I tripped into. In my disoriented state, I had run for the nearest edge of the forest where a paved road was. I scrambled through the ditch and onto the road. The thing in the woods refused to follow me. I could see a solid black shape moving between the solid trunks of pines, stretched out between them longer than any animal could be, and through the darkness, I could discern many legs of whatever that abominable thing was as it prowled the edge of the forest. I ran along the road, faster than I had ever run in my life. At home, and feeling considerably more sober, I found my clothes covered in blood and slime from whatever those still warm remains on the forest floor had been. Hey everyone, Raggedy Anzie here. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. If you guys are into horror narrations, horror animations, and storylines, then please check out my channel. I try to do everything quirky, kooky, and a little bit spooky. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that bell. Voting's on Saturday, and it would be really awesome if you guys voted for me.